Hey guys, hello, welcome back to another episode of Blazor State Has Changed. How are my Blazor fans today? We've got quite a few good bits of news. I didn't cover a whole lot of community news last week, and this week I've got a ton of it. So I've got a lot of great articles and things that people have been posting. I'm assuming the little bit of lull in the action was due to the latest updates and stuff. Everybody was kind of getting on board the new bits. So now that everybody is updated to Blazor 08.0, we've got a lot to talk about. So I've got quite a few articles lined up that I'll chat about today. And then we'll get on to some demos. I actually want to demo some stuff from one of the articles because I thought it was kind of interesting, and I didn't think it'd be too long for the show. So let's start off with Mr. Magoo's post. Mr. Magoo's posted about uploading large files with Blazor. And I see Mr. Magoo's in the chat room. So Mr. Magoo's got an awesome blog post here because this is a very difficult subject for Blazor right now because there's no native API for uploading files in the browser. So you have to kind of drop down to JavaScript interop to do it. So Mr. Magoo's got a nice outline here of all the things that you need to take care of to upload and receive larger files in Blazor. And it's a really well-written piece here with the sample project. So that's my first recommendation to check out this week is learn how to do these file uploads. It's really cool stuff. So thanks for the post there, Mr. Magoo. I'm going to get on to Chris Santi's post here on cascading parameters and values. He did a good deep dive into understanding cascading values and parameters and outlined in great detail how to use these features in Blazor, what they're generally used for, and gave some really good examples on how they interact with child components and things like that. So if you're looking at ways to manage state across several components in your application, give this post a look. And I'll have links to all these in the show notes. There's too many of them for me to just paste them all in the chat room today. I've got about 6 articles here that I'm going to go through, so I'll have these all up on my blog after the show today. So Chris's post is another great one to look at if you're new to Blazor and learning or Razor components or Blazor and learning about cascading values and parameters. Really good stuff there. Next one on the hit list here is by Michael Washington. And I believe he's covering some of Mr. Magoo's stuff here as well. So he's talking about animation effects in Razor components in Blazor. And these guys are working on some really crazy stuff. I've been watching go across Twitter for the last couple weeks where they're animating pixels and making some really crazy pixel effects that follow your cursor and stuff like that. So there's a really detailed outline of how they accomplished this. And I believe this is all Mr. Magoo stuff again. His mad scientist level stuff that he's doing here is really cool to look at. So there's a lot of CSS and inline styles being used to animate these pixels, and Michael Washington went through and in a very detailed post outlined how all this stuff was written. So after creating this this wild creation, it looks like Mr. Magoo didn't feel like writing about it, so Michael Washington picked it up and ran with it, which is totally awesome to see the community working together on some stuff like this. I was watching the tweets of the GIF images go back and forth across Twitter last week, and I thought it was pretty crazy what they were doing. So it's a really cool post to check out, and I feel you, Mr. Magoo. Mr. Magoo says he got bored once the demo was finished. I experience that quite often myself, so I know what you're talking about. I know where you're coming from on that one. This post is on dzone. This is by Michael. Um, this is another concept of how to handle events across an application in a more global manner. So this is an event aggregator of approach to Blazor and Razor components. So this is a really cool article as well that shows you how to kind of handle things across an entire application when events are occurring. We've kind of demoed some stuff like this before on the show with a Redux style pattern called Fluxer. So this is kind of in the same ballpark. So you're taking this one is taking a approach from Caliburn Micro, which is an MVVM framework on .NET, and it's kind of taking it from that approach. So it's a good read as well. Mr. Wolfman or Lapusa has been very active developing all kinds of really in-depth component examples, and he's got this grid that does all sorts of cool stuff like virtualization and locked fixed columns and stuff like that. I don't have a blog post on this one, but it's a really interesting piece of component work that's up on GitHub, so I'll make sure I link to that as well. So it's got all kinds of interesting features for you to check out to see how to implement those type of things. So it's really cool for him to share the source code on that one. And then finally, I'm going to actually go, I got this post twice here. This one was a little bit easier to show on the stream, so it's actually posted on Remy's blog as well as C# Corner. So this is, I'm actually going to go through some demos on this one because I thought it was interesting and also small enough that I could show it in some demos today. But it's about using Configuration Manager on the client, which I thought was interesting. So usually use this environment variables and Configuration Manager on the server to take into account things like connection strings and whatnot. And Remy has deployed this on the client-side Blazor model. And you could store application variables in these configuration options. And then he's also switching on what environment you're in. So if you're debugging and things like that, you could swap out these configuration variables for other things. And thought it was an interesting approach. And he does mention in the article, you don't want to store private keys and stuff like that inside of your client-side application variables. That's probably a really bad idea because anything on the client can be read by the client. So use this with caution that you don't want to put anything really important that can allow the client to gain access to things they're not supposed to have access to. So use it with caution, but we're going to actually take this and try it out and see how this is all implemented, because I think this could be useful, and he did a really good job outlining it, and I don't think it'll take us too long to actually walk through the steps here and put this in a project. So I'm going to close out all other tabs here and just focus on this for a little bit, and we'll start up a new Blazor project and do some demos with it. So how about that? And if you guys have questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat room, and we'll pick up any topics that you guys are interested in as we go along. So let's get into some coding, guys. So I'm going to keep the article open here in the background. I've got a brand new project. I just did file new Blazor project. Nothing special going on here. Just to make sure everything's working properly, I'm just going to open up the index and do a quick Control F5 build and run without debugging, make sure everything's working. Just installed the latest Visual Studio 2019 version preview 4. So I'm running on the latest bits of Visual Studio, Blazor 080, and let's see what we got here. application looks like it's up and running. So everything's good here. We're ready to kind of hack away at this brand new project. So close this guy out and come back in. I'm going to bump up the font size because I know it's hard to see on the stream. Let's get this up and make it look nice and big for everybody so you can read along with me as I code here. There we go. That should be nice and big where everybody can see it. Let's get some of these windows out of the way a little bit. Give us plenty of room. All right. So back to the article, and let's start off here. So what we're talking about is environment variables. And usually when we're running on another type of application, whether it's a desktop or server application, generally you've got access to your environment and things like that. When we're in the browser, things are a little bit different. So we don't have access to these environment variables the way that we normally do. So what Remy has here is an alternative way to find out what environment that we are in. And he's created something he calls the environment chooser, and it's going to try to get the environment from the URI that we're using. So if we're on localhost, for example, we're going to be running this in a development environment. So he's using those type of things to figure out where we are running this application, what the current context of the application is. So that's where the article starts out. And it's like, starts here, find the environment on startup. This is the steps that he uses to get the environment given the URI, and he's got a specialized class for it. And all the code is here, and it's documented really well. So let's go ahead and grab this out. This is just a class file. It's going to be a new class. I'm just going to copy the name out. It's going to be called Environment Chooser. And we'll copy this into our code base here, and then we'll kind of give it a good look. So let's do add new item. Don't grab, Goran says, don't grab the VS 2019 release candidate if you're doing Blazor stuff. It's not supported by .NET Core 3. I'm not sure if that's true. I'm running Visual Studio 2019 Preview 4, and I'm not having any issues with Blazor in .NET Core 3. So I'm not sure where the hiccup is. Enable the preview SDKs. I have to see what version exactly I'm on, but yeah, I believe so. I've got the preview version of ASP.NET Core 3.0, so we'll take a look at that in a sec. Actually, if I jump out to the command line real quick, it's really easy to see. Let's see, I should be able to do .NET version, actually this is -- version. Yeah, I'm on 3.0.100 preview, and then that's the version of the preview I'm on. So yeah, I'm on the latest, I believe that's the latest preview bits. There might be some nightly build or something that's newer, but that's the last one that was blogged about by the team, so that's the one I've got. So I wanted to add this class file. I started adding a view. I don't want a view, I want a class file. So this is going to be, whoops, I actually copied that. I didn't want to copy that version number. I want environment chooser. Make sure I spell this correctly and don't fat finger it. So I'll just copy and paste environment chooser.cs is going to go in here. I'm just going to drop that in the root of my project. And then I'm going to go back to this post and I'm going to copy this code. So it's a public class here. Let me grab the comments as well. Go ahead and grab this entire thing out, and then we'll read through it in Visual Studio where we have IntelliSense and stuff to look through. And let's see what we've got. Looks like I've got a dependency that needs to come in. I'm not getting HTTP utility. I'm not sure what namespace that came from, so we'll have to go back and check and see if he's got notes on where that comes from. Oh, there's a release candidate that went yesterday. I know there was a Visual Studio release that went yesterday. If I look about on this, I've got version 16 preview 4. I'm not sure if there was a newer ASP.NET version. I haven't looked into that yet. So I'm getting an error on here so far. HTTP utility seems to be something that I don't have a reference to. So, and control period's not helping out. So I'm going to see if he's got something in here that makes reference to where HTTP utility comes from. Yeah, I'm not seeing it where that's coming from in here, but we'll keep on reading and see what happens. So after we build that, we'll have to initialize the configuration. He's stepping right in here, and I'm not seeing any reference to where HTTP utility comes from. So let's see if we can figure out where HTTP utility that namespace is. Let's do a quick search. System.web. Okay, so system.web. Not sure. Let's try ASP.NET Core because I'm not sure that's going to work for us. Right, so I'm not seeing any other namespaces where HTTP utility exists. Let's see if we can make reference to system.web and see if that'll clear it up. And that did it. Yeah, we do have access to HTTP web or system.web. So now we have reference to HTTP utility. I don't know why control period wasn't working for that. Usually control period will bring up those missing namespaces and just add them right to it. But for some reason it was not finding it, which is odd. So let's take a look at the next step here. And then we'll kind of dive into all the steps on what that environment chooser does for us, because we'll be making use of it, it looks like, next. So we need to use the environment chooser and inject an iConfiguration into the service collection. Right, so let's see. We're making add environment configuration. This is a static method here. Or static, let's see, static class. No, this is just a method. So don't see where this is being actually spun up. So I'm going to put it in, let's see, it's either going to be in startup or in program, probably in startup. Let's go ahead and put this in startup. So I think that's where we're going to make use of it. And I don't want to generate it and add missing usings. There we go. Let's see if that does the trick for us. So iConfiguration is missing as well. And iConfiguration, I believe, comes from Configuration Manager and Configuration Builder. Let's see. I'm not getting add references today for some reason. When am I starting? Is there an issue with the video maybe? Let's see, Lauren. Looks like Lauren might be having some issues. See, I'm going to pull this code out for a sec, and let's go take a look at this code again. Make sure make sure I'm adding it to the right place in my project. So we're defining, we have the environment chooser already added. That's obvious, that's a class. And then we need to initialize configuration. Yeah, it looks like I have it in the right place, so I just need to add the right using statements and stuff. Actually, he's got a public static void. Let's add it to, so it has to be in a static class. Environment chooser is a class, and startup is just a class, and this is a static, public static void. Let's try it on environment chooser. So we already have some references in here. Oh. Let me make sure I've got the right code in my clipboard. So we just really need to be able to call this somewhere. And he's not really specifying where this was placed. Well, he's calling from services, add environment configuration. So it's probably right there in the services, or in the startup CS. So let's, Visual Studio wants to jump off the screen here. Hang on a sec. System.web. This is all good. Save all. Make sure I've got this copied again. It always helps in these articles if it kind of lays out exactly where this code is supposed to lie. All right, so we've got some underscores here. We need to add, there we go, system dot using system iConfiguration. iConfiguration I know comes from another dependency, and let's see what that is again. iConfiguration, Microsoft extensions configuration. And we might have to pull that in from the outside. I don't know if that is available here. Microsoft extensions. Yeah, configuration isn't available at all, so we have to actually go out and get this one. So we need to add a reference here. Add a NuGet package. So manage NuGet packages, and then we need to go configuration. Browse. Microsoft configuration. I just want the root of it. I don't want all these extensions of it. So Microsoft extensions configuration, missing a dot in here. That's the dependency I want. So install that guy. That should give us access to what we need and get rid of some of these squigglies. So we've got a lot of red underscores in our project here we want to get rid of. And then we can make reference to it here with the using statement and say configuration. And now some of that stuff will go away. URI helper. That's under components. So ASP.NET Core Component Services is where URI helper is. So URI helper is part of Razor components, and that helps us get the URI paths and stuff that we have in our application. We don't even have reference to generic collections in here, so we'll get that added. Let's see what else we've got. This is probably going to be a reference to link. So there were not very many references at all in startup. It's pretty bare bones to begin with. And then configuration builder, add JSON file, and in-memory file provider. These are all things that we're going to have to go find as well. So configuration builder, let's go back to NuGet real quick. And then JSON, configuration.json, I believe, is where the other one lives. So go grab that one. So we've got quite a few packages that were not quite mentioned in the article that I saw. Maybe I need to scan through that again real quick, but I didn't see, let's see. Mentions where he got in-memory file provider from. There we go. For this to work, you need to add Microsoft extensions configuration. If I read a little further, I would have found these guys. Microsoft extensions configuration JSON. So we've added those. And the only thing we have left is this in-memory file provider, which he says he took from Stack Overflow, which is interesting because I don't see any code for it in here necessarily. Unless it's been inline. Well, no, it's not inline because he's calling inline or in-memory file provider here, but he doesn't have the code anywhere. So let's go jump over to his source file because he's got some resources up on his GitHub page. And let's see if we can find this in-memory file provider somewhere in here. Would imagine it's under client. This turned out to be a little bit more work than I expected it would be. I don't see in-memory file provider in here. So I'm not sure if this has the configuration in it or not. So let's see, hosting. Maybe there's a file provider. There it is. So we need this bit of code. So it wasn't much, but a link, I guess the Stack Overflow link is probably enough if you've got time to parse through all of the steps here. But I was trying to save a little bit of time and just do some copy paste coding. So let's see, let's move this down here. So we've got in-memory file provider and iFile provider. So that we do need a reference to. So iFile provider, More references coming in here. It's got a lot of dependencies to do this. Yeah, this has been interesting. So I'm not sure this is something that I would use. So far, it does seem like a lot of work to just get a simple setting for my application. So given that this is going to be on the client, I could imagine there are other places I could stash environment variables other than doing all of this work. So it seems a little bit convoluted to me to just add some configuration to my project. If it was in a reusable library that was already available, it may not be as bad, but it looks like initially this is a lot of work to get up and running. And I've still got something. Extension method must be defined. Yeah, that was an extension method, so we do need... there it is. I saw this in there earlier, and I was thinking this had to be somewhere else. So this actually needs to get ripped out of startup and put in its own class. Which that wasn't really outlined as well. So this needs to be in a class. We'll just call it my config for now. And we'll add a reference to there. Because this is a extension method. It's a static extension method that, since it's using the keyword this, that means it's an extension method. It has to be in a static class. So yeah, so Mr. Magoo says there's some reflection being used in here. That's probably going to be a performance hit as well. So yeah, I would agree with that too. So I see system.reflection is being used in here. So I would imagine this only happens on startup, on the application startup, so it might not be that bad. You're going to get that little bit of performance hit when the app's spinning up, though. So again, I think maybe a dedicated a dedicated class somewhere with a couple strings in it probably would suffice most configuration issues. But still, it's an interesting experiment. So we'll have to complete this out and see how flexible it is and what we can do with it. And then we'll pass some judgment after we're done. So we've got that stuff in place. For all intents and purposes, what this is doing, though, is making the workflow similar to that of the rest of .NET Core, which has these service configurations and stuff that we can just add into our projects. And depending on what environment we're in, we can choose environment variables out or variables out of our configuration options. So now we need to call this code from startup, configure services. So now we can make that configuration here. So we've got configure services. We're adding the environment configuration, and we're choosing between if it's development or production. Development's going to be local hosts, and then production is going to be wherever your domain is hosted. So it'd be something like mydomain.com. It's going to be your production environment, and you would have a different environment variable from there. So you could have different configurations based on where the application is being hosted. That's kind of the gist of what's being done. Let's finish this guy out. So we need to do, we need to add initialization in our configure. And then we can start adding our configuration files. So this is going to resolve our service for iConfiguration and put that in the application, or register it with the application. And then we can add some JSON files. They also need to be set as embedded resources with the project. So we need to include them in our project JSON file. So let's add some JSON files. So we can come into our app and say add new item. Let's see, web should narrow it down a little bit. And then we've got templates for config files in here. So Genescu Twitch engineers are looking into Razor components and say they like the components. That's pretty cool. It'd be nice to see a company pick up, a big company pick up Razor components and make something out of it. So now we can add something like appsettings.json to our application and make use of it. So we'll do appsettings.json. That's going to be our default configuration. This, we can blow out this. I'm just going to do a copy paste in here, and then we can make a appsettings dot development, and then we could also have appsettings dot production. And these would take and overload the values depending on which mode we're in. So appsettings.json is our default settings. So let's add some values in there. So we'll take his example and just add a title. So we can say welcome to, this is default. So this would be the default configuration. So if we don't have an environment, that's what we'd get set. And then we'd have our development environment. And then we'd have our production environment. Overall, like the app configuration stuff from .NET Core is really cool. I'm not sure how necessary that stuff is in the context of Blazor, and whether all of this work is something that I would personally use. But it's really interesting to see it being implemented on Blazor. Just for the sake of just seeing if it's possible is pretty cool. So I'm going to take this next bit of code here. We need to tell our project to include these resources. So we're going to go in. I'm going to right click on app config and do edit the CSproj file, and then I'm going to tell it that configuration. Oh, he had these under a folder. I need to move those under a folder. Configuration appsettings.json and appsettings*.json are embedded resources. Actually, I'm going to just take out this here because I've got them in the root of my app, and I'm going to leave them there. I'm not going to worry about putting them in another folder. So I'm going to kind of throw this away when I'm done. So now these app settings should be, let's see if it should say in here, build action content. So these are part of my application. So these are going to get wrapped up with the app when I build it and deploy it. So okay, that's interesting. So let's see. Let's take and go back to our startup. And let's dive into environment chooser real quick. I want to see how we're picking this environment. It looks like we could use a query string if we like. And we're newing up an environment chooser and we're passing in the name of the environment. We saw that in our configuration. We're adding that host mapping in there. And we also have a flag that defines whether that configuration can be overridden or not. And then we're using the HTTP utility to look for query strings. And then I also think it's looking for local host in here, or the host name. So that so we're looking to see if that environment is found. So it's just scanning the URI for this kind of pattern here. So we're looking to see if we have local host. If it is, our environment is going to end up being the development environment, and that's the app config file we're going to load based on that. And then if we're on a domain, it's going to be the production environment, and we're not allowed to override any values. So if we have additional configuration values, we won't override those in production. Everything is registered, and this add environment configuration is where it takes, so we've got the environment chooser figures out if it's development or production, and then this add environment configuration, configuration dot app settings. This might be an issue because I didn't put it in a folder. Rather than to create some bugs, I'm going to go fix something that I kind of edited when I copied and pasted this in. So I'm going to go back here, and these were just to make sure I'm the same. I have the same thing as he did. Let's go ahead and put in configuration in here and move those files to the configuration folder. I want to just make sure I don't introduce any bugs I didn't need to. So now those are in there. Let's get back to startup and look through here a little bit more. So it's building the path names for the files, and then it's going to read through the files and get the settings out for us. So that's what this, where'd it go? Yeah, add environment configuration is doing. So it's going to get the values from these files out for us based on the environments we're in, and then we're going to make that available as a service. So now we can use it. We have to use dependency injection to grab configuration. This is the same way that we would do this in like an MVC application or something running on server side. Let's go to our index page, and then we can say Microsoft extensions configuration, configuration. It's going to bring in configuration as a dependency and resolve that. And then we can say configuration title, I believe, is what we should be able to grab. Let me double check here. Oh, sorry, we got to put it in this notation here. So we're going to grab the title setting out of our configuration. So now we should be able to display that in our H1. Let's go ahead and build this out. And it should give us a message that we are in production. So it should say something like hello from production or whatever that message was we typed in there. Give this guy a second to build and it should be ready to run. And it says, welcome to default values. So something's not quite right. So maybe it wasn't able to get the right path name. See, we've added local host. Just making sure everything's typed in right here. Yes, local host is spelled right, and there's nothing going on there. It should be grabbing our development configuration file and say welcome to development. Instead, it's grabbing the default value. Let's see what happens if we just remove, or actually, let's rename it because I don't want to have to remake it. See what happens if we don't have a default, if it kicks over to the development.json instead. I don't know if these are case sensitive either. I wasn't aware whether it was looking for a specific case or not on those files. We may have a casing issue. Let's see if it finds anything at all. So it didn't find anything that time, so it's not passing along any of those values. Let's take a look here. Take a look back at this article again. Yeah, so it is case sensitive, it looks like. So it's going to be development is capital D. Let's try fixing that. Let's see if that does the trick. And renaming that file looks like it might have crashed Visual Studio. So let's give that guy a second to recover. If it doesn't, we'll we'll kick Visual Studio and start over. So yep, there it goes. Encountered an issue. Let's see. I'm gonna just pop out to a file view. So maybe this will get around the fact that, oh, it did rename it. It didn't look like it did, but it did rename it. Let's do the production one. This is definitely a release candidate, you can tell. Visual Studio is giving me all kinds of hiccups trying to rename these files. On the file system, it did look like they were renamed. Not seeing them being renamed in here. Don't know quite why. But we shall try Control F5 again, see what happens. I'm surprised those file names didn't update in Visual Studio's project view. So there we go. Hey, it worked. Welcome to development. So if we were to deploy this, which I'm not going to do now, but if we were to deploy this on a domain, it would find our domain and then switch over to production. And then it would load different settings based on where the application is. This can be really handy if you have something that has very specific values for your development environment and very specific values for when it's deployed to the user. My concerns here are that you have to be very careful of what you place in any of this, because I believe you would have access to all of this on the client, the way it is packaged up with .NET. Let's actually take a look and see if we can find if there's anything coming over the wire that's visibly obvious. Let's take and reload the application with full network here. Let's take a look at what comes over. Sort these guys by name. Just taking a look through to see if those JSON files are passed over the wire. So they are not, they're actually embedded resources, I believe. So they would be inside of the DLL, but if you were to grab the DLL and decompile your app DLL, I think I named this one app config or something like that. Yeah, appconfig.dll would be my actual program. So if I grabbed appconfig.dll and I ran a decompiler on this, I could get into all of the JSON files that are in here because they are all scooped up and embedded in the package. So that makes me a little nervous, just because I might put something in production that I don't intend to ship across the wire, and then other people end up seeing or getting access to. So this could be a very sticky security issue if you're not aware of it. It's not inherent to, there's nothing to be a security concern about the pattern itself or any of the code here. It's the usage of it makes it easy to make a security mistake, in my opinion. So I'd have to see a really good use case for when this is needed and what it's being needed for, to kind of green light that on a project I'm using it in. But nevertheless, it is very very cool and very interesting that you're able to recreate this environment configuration, use configuration manager, basically. So configuration manager is used very heavily on the server side and is very useful on the server side because you're deploying a server-based application, and you want to have things like connection strings and different types of environment variables and things pulled out of configuration and used in your app. It's extremely secure because everything's on the server there. So security is not much of a concern, and is as much of a concern as it is when you ship things across the wire. But nevertheless, it's cool that you can use that same exact pattern in Configuration Manager to do this sort of work. And it's a really cool example that looks like a lot of hard work went into creating. So it's worth checking out if that type of thing fits a scenario where you have a lot of configuration options in your app that differ from when you're in development to when you're in a deployed state. There's possibly other ways you can handle this through build process and things like that, but it is a really cool approach and it is definitely worth checking out. It's very neat. So we got it to work. We did it. It's a good read. Gives us a good idea of how different the environments are. We needed this kind of file provider to read the values out of that JSON file and inject those at startup. So there's some pretty cool bits in there. Definitely worth checking out. Glad we got to kind of dig through that on the stream. I want to do one more demo today. And I'm not trying to make not purposely trying to make a regular thing out of putting the Telerik UI stuff on here. I do work for Telerik. I do love working with our products and stuff. But I just thought this was fun in general because it just shows how flexible Blazor Components is. So the next demo I want to do is, I had a question come across the Gitter channel about a feature on the Telerik Grid. And there's always these questions about, do we have X feature? And the Grid, I mean, it's brand new. We just released it just about a month ago now. And we're working on it pretty heavily behind the scenes, and there's a lot of features that are going into it that just aren't available yet because it's brand new. So we get these questions, you know, is X feature available? And I start thinking about the feature itself, and I'm like, you know, yes, it's a feature that's coming, but there's like hacky ways, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a really honest and I don't know how to phrase this, but it's an endearing term I'm using. It's not a slap in the face or anything, but there are these workarounds to these features, even though they're not baked in. They're doable just because Blazor's so flexible, and I think it's really awesome. So I got this question, and it goes to our data grid. The question was, do we have a master detail view for our data grid? And I thought about it for a minute, and it's like, no, we don't have a master detail view. So I'm going to pull up the examples that we have online. You can find these on GitHub. I'll post the link in my show notes. Gotta love strong typed values in Blazor. Yes, definitely, Janescu. That's absolutely where I'm going with this. Let's see, having some kind of runtime error here I'm not aware of. You know what? Let's take this from scratch if this doesn't come up. The build hung, which we get from time to time in here. This is on a branch that's under development, so all right, let's start from scratch so I can show you where I got these bits from and how to add this. So I'm going to close the solution, go back out to GitHub. This demo won't take very long either. I just thought this was really cool. GitHub.com under, let's see here, it is going to be let's try Blazor. So it's under the Telerik profile, and it is the UI for Blazor examples. Let's go ahead and clone this. I'm going to go ahead and grab this. I'm going to grab this URI here and go ahead and clone this project. So I'm going to go out to, let me go find a folder here. Let's go under repos. Got a special one for the show I use. And let's do OpenCLI here. I'm just going to jump into the command line real quick and just use git to clone this out. I'm going to clone that repo fresh as is. And there it is, UI for Blazor examples. Just go pop back into that folder, and then I can run. So this is a neat little trick if you didn't see this on the show earlier. I've got a couple versions of Visual Studio installed. And to ensure that it picks the right one, I'm going to click on the solution file. Up here, there's a little chooser. I guess this gets installed when you install Visual Studio. I'm going to make sure I have 2019 preview is the default for this project when I pull it up. And for some reason, this Windows today wants to keep changing where my Visual Studio instance pops up, and it keeps going on my monitor for the show instead of the one that I want to share. So apologize for that popping up in the wrong place every time I run something. Every time I run an app or open Visual Studio, it keeps jumping over to another window, so you guys are losing view of the editor here. But basically, this is a Razor Components app. Let's see. Let's do a Control F5. If you already haven't tried the Telerik UI components for Blazor, you'll need to register an account to get the dependency for the project here. But I already have that, so it's just gonna spin up and work for me. And we've got different examples of our grid, and this one is the one that I want to focus on. So this page is under grid templates. The question I got on the Gitter channel was, can we have a master detail view with the grid? And that's something that we're probably, I want to say it's on the roadmap. I can't remember if I've seen it officially on there or not. There's a lot of features on a roadmap, so I don't want to say the wrong thing and say it's there and it's not on there right now. But I believe it's on a roadmap to have something baked into the grid that does this. But the question was, do we have master detail views? And it got me thinking, well, we have an example here of how to do an edit form. So we can select an item from the grid and pass that item to a form on the page. This is basically the same idea as a master detail view. So I thought, how creative could I get with this idea of a master detail view? And I thought, well, we have a row template. So let's take a look at the row template. This is not the right project. Let's get this instance out of the way. This is the one. So I'm going to delete this second template thing out of here. We don't need this. There's two different examples on that page. Let's just focus on the row template. What a row template does, it says, give me a grid, bind some data, and then each row that's bound to the grid, I can set a template for. And then we have the ability to define custom HTML in here. In this instance, we have an image, the product name, and a formatted unit price. So that's what you see in this example. So the image, the product name, and the formatted price. And those things are in two columns. So we have these table columns here. So I'm thinking master detail view. First thing I need to do is allow somebody to select the row that I'm on. So in order for somebody to select the row, we need some type of a click event handler. I'm going to pull up a gist here. So I've already come up with a solution for this, and the finished solution has quite a bit of code on it. We'll walk through this step by step, though. So let's take a look here. So the first thing is we need to be able to click. I don't know how accessible this is, but this just is for experiment purposes. So I'm going to add an on-click event handler here. So when somebody clicks on this this column in the grid, or this cell in the grid, we're going to fire an event. What I want to do is capture the item, or the item ID in this case, and set a variable. So let's add a property here, or field. Either one would be fine. And it's going to be an integer because I'm going to grab the ID of the item that was selected. So I can say selected ID equals, let's do a nullable. So we may not have an ID that's been selected, like that. And then let's create a method. So we're going to have a method that, let's do void void, let me make sure I name it the same as my example, selected product, because I want to eventually move this. I've got some boilerplate code I want to move over. I want to make sure I name these the same. Selected product. And selected product is going to take a nullable int of ID. So the question is Northwind context a regular EF context or a proxy? This is a Blazor components app. So in this application, Northwind context is a direct reference to NAD framework. So this is my Northwind database context because we are on the server. So this page is being served over SignalR. So this uses Blazor components, not the client-side WebAssembly version of Blazor. So I'm going to have an event, an event handler here that I can bind to. And on click, what I'm going to say in on click is I'm going to pass in selected product, and I'm going to get product dot ID because I've got product. I've got my product object available inside of my template. So I've set the context up here, and on click in this cell, I'm going to call this selected product, and I'm going to pass in the ID. And once I have the ID, let's see, we've got a new follower. Let's see. Thanks for the follow, Nadeem. Thanks for the follow. Appreciate that. Thanks for joining the show, and we'll hopefully see you around. So selected product, and we're going to say selected ID equals ID, like that. We don't necessarily need this right this second, but we will eventually need state has changed here. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that so we don't run into any problems when we do need it. And then we should be able to now select this and grab an ID. So with that ID, what we can do is wrap this in an if statement. And we can say if product, if product.id is equal to selected ID, then we know we're on the currently selected item. So if the IDs match, that means we have a selected item. So now I have this ability to select and do some type of operation on this piece of HTML. Actually, I wanted to do this. Let's see, if ID, if it's, I want this to be in my else. So do it that way. So if it's selected, I want to show something else. So I want to show a detail view. Otherwise, I'm going to show the normal row. So just to show this works really quick, I'm just going to throw a div in here and a paragraph and let's see, product. Just to do a little proof of concept here. Let's render order details. I chose order details because it's something I'm not already showing. So this kind of just shows that I have full access to that object. And this, I believe, should just get us off the ground and running. So now we have a way to select that row and swap out the content for some type of detailed view. So back into grid templates, if I click, it did a toString on that right there, but it's starting to give us something to work with, is the point. What I can do here, I guess order details has more method or properties on it, maybe. Order details is a collection. Yeah, so that has more things in it. Maybe that wasn't the best example. What I can do is say TD and then column span 2. So I have 2 columns and I want to span both of them. So right now, if I hover this, you can see I'm only in this one cell. I want to go across the entire row. So I'm going to say column span 2. And now I can do something a little more detailed in here, and I can put in a div if I want and style that out. I can put in multiple items in here. Let's say product.id, and we can just duplicate this out and say product name, supplier, which I don't know if that one comes through or not. I don't know if that's tacked into the Entity Framework query that's running, but we'll take a look. Units on order, we'll just grab several properties out of here like we would in a detail view. And now we should be able to toggle this entire row and put some data out there. And I'll make this even way more detailed in a second. Just want to kind of show how this idea works in general. So now when I click on it, I'm showing some values. And notice since I have that if statement in there, when I click different rows, it shows the details for those rows and turns off the other one. So that gives me, and I have access to this entire row, both cells. So I've got kind of a master detail outline going on now. So now I can really do something cool with it. And instead of writing all this code out, I'm going to paste it in and I'll walk through what it all does. It's quite a bit of markup here. And this could be in another component even. We could try that out too in a minute. So I'll show some refactoring. I've got plenty of time for that. So we'll do some refactoring on this in a minute. So in the current example, I've got, let me close that one out. If we click, we have to choose another row to kind of close the detail view out. So what I want to add is a close button in there so I don't have a master detail always showing, so I can just close it if I don't want to see it. And I want to make this formatted to look a little bit better. So that code I just pasted in, still have this column span of 2, so I can take up both rows. And now I've got a button in here, so I threw a kendo button in here with a close icon. And then when somebody clicks on the close button, I'm just going to null out that selected value. So selected product is now null, so that should get rid of that detailed view and close that out. So now I've got a nice interface for that. Then I'm going to use a little bit of Bootstrap code in here, and I'm going to create a card with some nice margins on it. And then I've put my product image back in here. I have a nice form inside of this card that's got form elements in it, and the values are nicely laid out with labels and whatnot. So now I've got the full detail view. This is a pretty big piece of markup, but it's the detail view for this element. So now I can go back and rerun. Let's see if I can just refresh here. I should be able to just now this is Razor Components. It works a little different. I have to rebuild and then refresh. So rebuild and refresh this guy. And now I should have those code changes in. And now I can click on the row, and how does that look? That's a lot better looking. And I've got a nice detail view inside the grid. So while it's not baked in, it's not impossible by any means to create one. And I thought that was really cool because we didn't develop anything special to make this happen. It's part of the framework and the way that we've implemented row templates, that you can just throw pretty much anything in there. We have access to the item, and since we have access to the item, which was what Janescu was kind of alluding to with his comment about you gotta love strong types, since we have access to that full item in the type, we can just pass that to the template and render out all the bits. Now we've got a nice close button too, so we can just collapse that if we don't want to see it. We can still toggle between rows if we want to, but we can close it out if we don't want to see it at all. And it's pretty fluid too. There's no real lag in clicking between these and displaying that template. So I thought that was pretty cool. We've got some more time, so let's do some more work on it. I've got all this markup inside of the template, which kind of sucks. I don't like seeing all this markup in here. Let's see if we can move this out to a component. So I think that would help alleviate some of the stuff. So we could create a component. We could just call that component something like detail template or detail view or something like that. So let's do that. Let's add an item. So we can do add new item. Let's say we need ASP.NET Core Razor View. It's the easiest way to get a template up. We could say row detail is going to be our, actually I'm going to rename this. It's going to be product row detail, because it's going to be very specific to a product, because it has the type names and stuff in here. So let's copy this out. I'm going to leave out the button. So let's just grab the display part of it. So we don't really need the button in there. We'll just paste all this code in and watch Visual Studio throw errors at us for no reason. And we need to now define what product is, because we don't have that variable anymore. So we've got all of the code from this template. We're going to put it in a component. So we basically just need a parameter that we can set, right? So come in here and say functions. Open up a code block here and say we need a product. And this is going to be a product from, we probably need a using statement. This is coming from models. So let's come up to the top and say at using, using. Sometimes IntelliSense helps a little too much. Telerik Blazor app models. So now we should be able to say product as product lowercase. Oh, wait, actually we need to do parameter. So this is a nice little shortcut. I can type para, tab, and then now it's product and product. Let's see, since it's a property, it's going to be uppercase. Let's go ahead and follow proper conventions. What's going on here? Why do I not have a parameter attribute available? It seems a little odd. I don't know if it's... let's see if it's because of these errors or what. Parameters shouldn't be underscored here. That should be easily resolved. Let's go ahead and put these in. Let's see if this still gives us an error when we're done. Let's see. Let's call this selected, just to not have any confusion with the actual type name. All right. So I'm not sure why I'm getting parameter. I'm using parameter elsewhere, I believe. View imports, Microsoft Entity Framework Core. Let's see, at the root level, I have ASP.NET Core layouts. Maybe not. So let's just double check. I may need to add the using statement for components here. Whoops. Got all of it on my clipboard. Let's try components. That's where that namespace should be. I guess I didn't have a reference anywhere else for it. Higher up the chain of view imports. So there we go. Now I have my parameter. I'm going to call this selected product. And now I should be able to just declare the component here. And I called it product row detail. And we can pass in for the selected product. Use my @ symbol here. And now I should be able to pass in the product. And then I just need to close off my tag. So now I just replaced all that markup with a component. And I can save this, rerun it. Should get the same exact behavior, but now I've got my all of my markup encapsulated in a component where it's nice and tucked away and not hogging up a bunch of real estate in my editor. So that looks even better yet. So super flexible, Blazor super flexible. The data grid is super flexible as well because we're building it with native Blazor or Blazor components framework. We're not wrapping our JavaScript stuff. It's all brand new code. It's all built on Blazor components. So we're able to do really cool stuff like this. And I really am enjoying working with Blazor components because you can just think outside of the box, and a lot of times these things just work. So that's really cool for me. Any questions in the chat room? Anybody see anything on this demo that they'd like to try something with, or have any questions for today on any of the content that we looked at, any of the articles we read over? You guys still with me? All right. Well, when's the next Telerik release? Excellent question. I don't have any official release dates. I would say that there's two possible release date candidates. One of those release dates would be our second release of the year. So we have actual scheduled releases. The next release will be in the middle of the year. I want to say July. Let's see, Telerik.com. We just had one. We do this about every 3 to 4 months. So let's go to product. Any of them will do, but I'll go to ASP.NET Core because there's a significant roadmap here. Yeah, we don't have a date on this one. We did the last release in January. So we should be getting ready for our second release pretty soon. The other release window would be, there will be a partial release with the next version of Blazor. So in order just to keep up with the latest version, we might just ship what we have when the next version of Blazor comes out. So whenever that is, which I don't think we've gotten any real window on that exactly. I know there's another preview coming of ASP.NET That preview should be shipping sometime next week, I think, because Daniel Roth was in the chat room a couple days ago and alluded to release this week, which I haven't seen. That would be preview 3, I believe. ASP.NET Core 3.0 preview 3 would be the next iteration. Yeah, I don't see preview 3 is out yet. Yeah, there's quite a few previews coming. So I don't know if there's going to be a new Blazor version that ships with the next preview. If there is, there's a possibility you might see a new version of the Telerik UI for Blazor as well, with some new features. Let me grab a calendar off screen here. Give me a moment. I might have a release date. That's a good question. I know I've got a schedule for it. So we're looking at, that's too far down the road. There's one in October, but that's the 3rd release of the year. So you will see an update. There we go. March, April, May, June. So the most accurate answer I can give you, Lauren, is June. So it would either be during the next Blazor release or sometime in June. So yeah, preview 3 is soon. If preview 3 bumps the rev on Blazor, you may see a Telerik UI bump on Blazor as well, possibly with some new features if they're completed. Otherwise, it will be June timeframe, June and October. So watch updates for June and October, or watch the site for notifications for updates in June and October. And we'll have some updates coming then. I don't think we've made the roadmap public yet on what features will be included in the next release. And I can't really allude to why those things are, but we are working on adding quite a few new components. So we'll see some stuff coming out pretty soon. New grid features, and it's going to be something that we continue to build on until we come to parity with the rest of our frameworks that we have out there. So we already support ASP.NET MVC and Core and Web Forms and Angular and React and Vue. So Blazor's just joining the party, and it's should come online fairly quickly. One thing that I think people would like to see soon is charts. So I think that will be something we should see this year. Again, I can't say when or where, but I think that's something that we would see pretty soon. Hopefully that answers your question. And anybody else got any questions before we wrap up today? Hopefully you guys found some cool stuff with the demos today. And there's definitely a lot of good reading material out there for the weekend. And I'll make sure I get that blog post up as soon as possible so you guys can grab those links and read those. Blog posts that everybody in the community worked so hard on this week. Lots of good stuff out there. How about component-specific CSS? I know there's some attempts at component-specific CSS. So the question is about component-specific CSS. In Angular, you can add a CSS or Sass within the component folder. Is that possible with Blazor 2? It is not at this time. There's some like experimental stuff I've seen people do that make that kind of work. So the idea would be, let's take this row details component for a minute. In row details, you would specify some sort of link to a file. We maybe say CSS file or something like that, and it would only render that file if you were using that specific component. There's no way to do that right now. And it also, in Angular and React and those things, it scopes the CSS to that component. So there's some type of identifier that gets prefixed onto the CSS selector. There's just nothing like that right now. I know this is a pretty popular thing that people like to do. One of the reasons that you don't see it in Blazor right now is Blazor is primarily C# technology, and you would need some sort of pipeline to build that Sass into CSS and drop the file and stuff like that from your C# code. All of those utilities are written in JavaScript right now. So you have these, since Angular and React are built in JavaScript, that's where the build pipelines are at for that type of thing. So you have Webpack being used generally with those frameworks, and Webpack scans through your JavaScript files and pulls that CSS code out. And puts that where it belongs. It pipes it into Sass compilers and outputs the files and things like that. We don't have that build process in place with C#. So I think it might be a little bit of time before you see that. From the work that I do, generally I'm building. I'm not building things that require that. So just using good Sass techniques works well. When I say good Sass techniques, you can look at Bootstrap, you can look at Kendo UI for examples, where your Sass files do all that work for you. Actually have another pretty good example of that that I can open right here. Let's see. Let me close this out. Actually, keep it open in case somebody pops a question on it real quick. Last week, I migrated this project, and I'll make sure I push it up to GitHub. So I have this component example. The current version of it on GitHub is on Blazor 0.7.0, so I'll have to get this updated one up there. And okay, Visual Studio, let's go. Let's go to the other screen. All right. So what I have is, in this project, I'm using 100% .NET Tech. So there's nothing in here that's using like Webpack or anything. And inside of my content folder, you'll see I'm using Bootstrap and I'm using the Sass files. So I'm grabbing those Sass files from the web using something called libman. So it's a library manager for .NET. And libman, you point it at a version of a library you want to use. In this case, it is Bootstrap 4.1.3, and you can get just files that you want from that library. So I want to get all the Sass files, and I'm going to dump all the Sass files in a Bootstrap folder. So once I have all of those, you can see this is what I'm talking about with a good Sass build. So Bootstrap and Kendo UI does the same thing. Every component has a corresponding Sass file, and they're all prefixed by an underscore. Let's see if I can zoom in here. Control plus. So every Sass file that is a component, you see there's an underscore on each one. So badge, cards, forms, navs. This one I have BL nav, which is Blazor nav. So I'm just using the tab component out of Blazor, or sorry, tab component out of Bootstrap, and I've customized it. So I've created my own component markup called blnav. So I have that file there. Then once you list out all of your component styles in these various CSS files or Sass files, then you have a single manifest file. Bootstrap uses one called bootstrap.css. Kendo UI uses one called all.css or Sass, all.sass or bootstrap.sass. And then in this file, you can just pick the components you want for that app. So not too many people really use this feature of Bootstrap, and it's a shame because it's very powerful. So in this example, I'm only using the resets and mix-ins and things like that, and just the nav component that I created. And I'm just piggybacking off of some of the hard work of Bootstrap, but I'm not using any of the buttons or anything like that. So when I run my compiler, I only got 75 lines of code, even though I've taken in the entire Bootstrap dependency. I'm only building just a portion of it. So all the source files just stay in my development project. None of this gets shipped across the wire. The only thing that gets shipped across the wire is this little bit of CSS for that component. So for CSS compilation, Lauren's asking what do I use to compile CSS? And again, I'm just using .NET Tech. And I'm using something called web compiler. So if you look in my NuGet folder here, I've got build web compiler. Let's go in to manage NuGet packages, and you'll see it in here. So build web compiler is a version of web compiler that you can initialize from MS Build, and it is on GitHub, or sorry, NuGet. I didn't mean to report a bug. There we go. So you can find build web compiler here, and when you install it in your project, the MS Build will see it, and there's a configuration file that you use to control what it does. Those configuration files are extremely easy to create. So what you do is you come into your CSS and you right click on what you want to build, and okay, it's not going to do it for it may not be working in Visual Studio 2019, or there may be another plugin that you have to install to get the menu version of it, but you can install something that will give you a right-click button. You just say compile, and it'll create the file for you. That compiler config file looks really simple, though, if you want to make one manually. It's just a JSON file that says the output goes here, the input came from here, or vice versa. You can swap these out if you don't want to read it backwards. So we're going to grab... yeah, so you probably need the Visual Studio extension. So you just point it at the file. So this is my entry point. So this is my manifest file. I don't know if there's a proper name for what that file is, but it's the entry point for all of the Sass. So I'm going to grab Bootstrap and compile that, and this Bootstrap CSS file has dependencies on functions, variables, and mixins, and my navigation, and that's all it has. So it goes out and compiles those things into tabset.css. Then once I have tabset CSS, I just reference it. Yeah, it's really cool stuff. I did a show on this actually quite a while back. I wonder if I can find that. Let's go to my web page. It would be probably a few months back. I don't know if it was... Yeah, it was before I was naming the shows. want to think it was in December. Let's see. Yeah, actually, that was it. This show... I don't know if this one made it on... I don't know if this one made it on YouTube. This might have been before I was exporting things to YouTube. If it is up there, it's under December 14th. Might cross the streams here, pulling up YouTube. Hopefully nothing starts auto-playing. It would be from December... I'll have to look and see if I can find it. I don't want to sit here on the stream and scan through, but it would be one of the very first shows. I did walk through it in pretty great detail, so it'd probably be, I'm assuming it'd be like this one maybe. Yeah, I think that's it. So let's see who asked that question originally about SaaS. Or component. Dev Manny, I think this might be the closest thing you can get right now. Give that video a try. See if that helps any. I think I've already covered those things in that video. But to fully answer your question, no, there's not that tech directly. Where I can specify SaaS right here in the component. You can build a component library though and build your SaaS files out and have them compiled in a friendly manner. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's a very best practice way of doing things. And that's actually the way I do things anyway. Even if they had that other feature, it's just it's not something that I normally use. I use the same way that Bootstrap built theirs and the same way Kendo UI's built is the way that I do my dev. I just find things easier that way. It's just a personal preference is all. No right or wrong way there. So that's a great question though. Excellent question. So I think I'm going to wrap things up unless somebody's got something really hard hitting that they haven't been able to ask yet. Go ahead and wrap this up. We'll jump on something again next week. I'm not sure what. There's a lot of cool articles that crop up that give me ideas over the week, and I kind of do this off the hip. So nothing's really prepared or planned. Like the master detail view thing was just a question that somebody came up with, and I thought would be cool to show on the show. So next week we'll do something similar, and hopefully you guys enjoy it. So thanks for the new followers and things that came on while we were streaming today and all the great questions. I'll post show notes on my website. I don't think I posted that in the chat room, but it's just my name. So show notes will be up on my website later today. I'll have the links to all the stuff that we talked about as far as articles and things that we pasted in the chat room. I've got a podcast that I recorded with Jeremy Lickness that will show up sometime next week, which should be a great listen for folks. There's some Blazor talk in there, and we cover some other cloud serverless computing topics as well. It's a fun podcast that I got to record with Jeremy. I'll share that out on my Twitter when it comes live next week. So have a great weekend, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and have fun hacking away at some Blazor stuff. Have a good weekend.